The rain fell in sheets, a relentless drumming against the floor-to-ceiling windows that sounded like a cavalry charge. Outside, the world was awash of gray, the heavy drops churning the surface of Lake Washington into a frenzy. But inside the sprawling lakeside mansion, the atmosphere was one of serene warmth, a stark contrast to the storm raging without. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers, and the flickering candlelight cast a warm, dancing glow upon a bouquet of crimson roses. Tonight was our 5th wedding anniversary, a milestone I often boasted about to my colleagues whenever they lamented the trials of married life. I sat at one end of the long mahogany dining table, gazing at the man meticulously slicing a filet mignon at the other. That was Mark, my husband. In the golden candlelight, his features seemed even more refined, the face of a thoughtful intellectual. The gentle eyes behind his gold-rimmed glasses held a tenderness that hadn't wavered in 5 years. As an anesthesiologist, my days were spent in the sterile, high-stress environment of the operating room, a world defined by the cold scent of antiseptic and the razor-thin line between life and death. Mark's attentiveness and warmth were the perfect antidote, the ultimate sedative for my soul. He placed the perfectly sliced steak in front of me and poured a deep red Cabernet Sauvignon into our crystal glasses. The ruby liquid swirled, catching the candlelight in a mesmerizing dance. He raised his glass, his deep, resonant voice, a comforting anchor against the storm. "Happy anniversary, my love. I'm so sorry the gift I ordered from Paris got held up in customs," he continued. "It won't be here until next week, but I promise you'll love it." I smiled, my heart swelling with happiness as I reached for my glass. "I don't need gifts, Mark. Just having you here, like this, is more than enough. You are the greatest gift." Mark's gaze deepened, as if it held an entire universe of affection. "Drink up, darling. I chose this vintage carefully. It's your favorite." I nodded, bringing the glass to my lips, inhaling the complex bouquet of oak and ripe berries that tantalized my senses. But just as the rim of the glass touched my lips, the phone on the table buzzed violently, shattering the romantic ambiance. The screen lit up. Detective Miller. That was my cousin, Chris, a detective with the Seattle PD. He rarely called at this hour unless it was a dire family emergency back in Ohio. I was about to silence the call, not wanting this private moment interrupted, but Mark spoke up. "You should get that, honey. It might be important." Chris wouldn't call this late for no reason. His thoughtfulness only made me love him more. I swiped to answer, intending to keep it brief. Before I could even say hello, a voice, not Chris's usual jovial tone, but a choked, guttural growl, cut through the static of sirens and pouring rain. "Listen to me, Amelia. Whatever you do, do not drink that wine. Make an excuse. Get out of there, now. Lock yourself in the basement." I was stunned, my hand holding the wineglass trembling slightly. "Chris? What are you talking about? I'm having dinner with Mark." His voice was a strained hiss, as if he were racing against death itself. "That's not your husband, Amelia. He's a monster. Mark took out a $5 million life insurance policy on you. The beneficiary is him. It activates at midnight tonight. He's drowning in debt to the mob. He's going to kill you for the money. Get out now. $5 million. Mob debt. Kill his wife." The words hammered against my eardrums, my world spinning. My first instinct, the primal reaction to horrifying news, was to look at Mark. He was still sitting there, that gentle smile on his face. But in the flickering candlelight, the smile seemed to twist, becoming grotesque, demonic. Then I saw it. His hand, resting on the table, was gripping the tablecloth so tightly his knuckles were white. He was trembling, not with emotion, but with the raw, exhilarating anticipation of a predator about to spring its trap. In that instant, the perfect, rose-colored world I had built for 5 years shattered into a million pieces, leaving only a cold, brutal reality that chilled me to the bone. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard it hurt. But the professional discipline of an anesthesiologist took over, forcing a cold calm to descend upon me. In the OR, a single second of panic can cost a patient their life. And right now, I was the patient. I took a deep breath, schooling my features to hide the terror churning inside me. I slowly lowered the wine glass, feigning a grimace. I brought it to my nose, sniffed it again, and pouted. "Honey," I said, my voice a practiced, playful whine. "I think this bottle needs to breathe a little longer. The alcohol is still too strong. I just remembered, we still have that bottle of 20-year-old port my dad gave us for our wedding in the wine cellar. Why don't I go grab it? Tonight is special. We should have the best." Mark's brow furrowed for a fraction of a second. His eyes scanned my face, a high-tech sensor searching for any anomaly. For that one moment, I felt like a cornered animal, exposed before the hunter's rifle. But apparently, my casual expression and natural tone had fooled him. He nodded, his smile returning. "You're right, of course. Go get it. I'll keep the food warm." I stood up, forcing my legs to move normally even as my knees threatened to buckle. I turned and walked toward the door to the basement. I could feel his eyes on my back, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. The 30 feet from the dining table to the cellar door felt like an eternity. The second I crossed the threshold, I slammed the heavy, fire-rated steel door shut. It was a door Mark had installed to protect his expensive wine collection and collectibles. Now, it was my only fortress. My trembling hands fumbled with the deadbolts. 1 turn, 2 turns, 3. The metallic thunk of the bolts sliding home was a dry, desolate sound, yet it offered a fragile sliver of security. I slid down the cold steel door, my back pressed against it. Just then, a creeping numbness began to spread from the tip of my tongue down my throat and into my limbs. My arms and legs felt as if they were weighted with lead, my vision blurred. With a jolt of horror, I remembered the glass of lemonade Mark had given me before dinner, to cleanse your palate for the wine, he'd said. Succinylcholine. With my medical knowledge, I recognized the symptoms immediately. It was a fast-acting muscle relaxant, typically used for intubation. But an overdose, especially taken orally in a high concentration, would cause respiratory paralysis and death, leaving behind very few traces. He had planned everything. The poisoned wine was just a backup, or perhaps evidence to stage a death by alcohol poisoning or a sudden stroke. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of something heavy crashing against the door erupted behind me, making me jump. Mark's voice, stripped of all its gentle charm, roared through the steel, the snarl of a cornered beast. "Amelia, open the door. What the hell are you doing? Open it right now." He knew. He knew I'd found out. The act was over. The metallic thuds grew louder, more frantic. He was probably using a sledgehammer or an axe from the garage. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Chris. "Hold on, cops 3 mins out." 3 minutes. For a normal person, it's nothing. But for me, as a paralytic drug slowly shut down my body, it was the chasm between life and death. I couldn't just sit here and wait. If he broke through that door and found me unharmed, he would kill me instantly in some other, more brutal way. I had to stage an accident, a plausible reason for my injuries, an unconsciousness that would hide the fact that I knew about his plot. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, the sharp pain a desperate anchor to consciousness. Summoning the last vestiges of my strength, I threw myself against the large oak wine rack. Crash! The rack toppled over, sending dozens of expensive wine bottles smashing to the floor. A river of dark red liquid, looking eerily like blood, spread across the concrete. I grabbed a sharp shard of glass, closed my eyes, and dragged it across my left forearm. A searing pain shot through me, but it fought back the drug-induced drowsiness. Fresh blood welled from the cut, mingling with the spilled wine on the floor. I collapsed amidst the wreckage, curling my body into the position of someone who had slipped, fallen, and been crushed by the heavy rack. The overpowering smell of wine and the metallic tang of blood made me want to vomit, but I no longer had the strength. Outside, the brutal assault on the door continued, each blow closer than the last, like the footsteps of the Grim Reaper coming to claim my soul. The heavy steel door buckled and flew open. The light from the hallway flooded the dark cellar, illuminating the chaotic scene. Mark burst in, a gleaming metal golf club clutched in his hand, his face a mask of raw, untamed fury. But in that same instant, the piercing wail of police sirens, the thunder of heavy footsteps, and the sweeping beams of flashlights crashed down the stairs like a flash flood, washing away his murderous intent. I lay sprawled on the cold floor, blood still seeping from my arm, mixing with the dark red wine to form a thick, viscous pool. My eyelids fluttered weakly, just enough to witness the horrifying transformation on my husband's face. In a heartbeat, the murderous rage vanished, replaced first by sheer panic, then by a display of profound, heart-wrenching agony. He tossed the golf club aside and scrambled to my side, dropping to his knees. His hands hovered over me, trembling, afraid to touch me as if I were made of fragile glass. He let out a primal scream, a sound of utter desolation that echoed off the stone walls. "Amelia! Oh my God! Amelia! What happened? Somebody help! Help my wife!" Tears streamed down his face, soaking his handsome features. To any outsider, it was the picture of a devoted husband shattered by tragedy. But to me, the woman lying in a pool of her own blood to survive, a cold dread snaked up my spine. Nausea, more potent than any side effect of the muscle relaxant, churned in my stomach. His performance was too good. So good, it was terrifying. Chris was the first one through the door, his Glock still drawn but pointed at the floor. His eyes took in the scene, flashing with a mixture of pain and barely suppressed fury. He signaled for his officers to call for an ambulance, then approached Mark, his voice cold and official. "Mr. Davenport, please step aside and let the paramedics work. We received a 911 call reporting screams and a possible domestic disturbance." Mark looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Domestic disturbance? What are you talking about? My wife came down to get some wine. She must have slipped and fallen. This damn rack is so heavy. I told her I'd get it, but she insisted. It's my fault. It's all my fault." He punctuated the last words by pounding his chest, the very image of self-recrimination. I closed my eyes, surrendering myself to the care of the paramedics as they lifted me onto a stretcher. I couldn't bear to look at his deceitful face for another second. On the way to the hospital, Mark sat beside me, clutching my cold hand, muttering a continuous stream of apologies and prayers. But I could feel his palm, slick with cold sweat. He wasn't afraid of me dying. He was terrified of his plan being exposed, terrified of that $5 million insurance payout slipping through his fingers. The ambulance sped through the rainy night, ironically taking me back to the very place I worked. Dr. Evans, the department head and my respected mentor, was on duty and personally handled my case. He frowned, his silver brows knitting together as he looked at the toxicology report, noting the abnormal levels of succinylcholine in my blood. But just as he was about to ask, Chris stepped in, giving a slight shake of his head. Dr. Evans, a man of experience, understood immediately. He sighed, then wrote in my chart, "Multiple soft tissue injuries due to household accident. Monitor for concussion." I was moved to a recovery room after my wound was stitched, and I was put on an IV to flush out the toxins. Mark never left my side. He tenderly wiped my face, adjusted my pillows, and refused all offers from family to relieve him. He played the role of the devoted, grief-stricken husband to perfection, so much so that the younger nurses, some of them my own colleagues, looked at him with admiration and pity. I lay there, listening to his staged sobs, listening to the whispers of praise for him, and my heart turned to cold ash. "Get a grip, Amelia. You can't be weak now. He wants to play? I'll play along. But I will be the one directing the final act." I slowly opened my eyes, deliberately making my gaze vacant and confused. Seeing me awake, Mark rushed forward, his voice trembling. "Amelia, you're awake! Do you know who I am?" "Oh God, you scared me to death." I stared at his worried face, blinked a few times, and then frowned, my voice weak and raspy. Who are you? Why am I here?" Mark froze, his entire body stiffening for a moment. He peered into my eyes, searching for a hint of deception, but I held my empty, confused gaze. After a few seconds of shock, I saw a flicker of something strange in his eyes. He thought fate was on his side. He thought the fall had wiped my memory of the horrific truth. He took my hand and pressed it to his cheek. The tears started again, but this time, the corner of his mouth twitched into a subtle, triumphant smirk. "It's okay, darling. It's okay if you don't remember. I'm Mark, your husband. You had a fall, but the doctor said you're going to be okay. I'll be right here with you, always." The weak morning sun filtered through the blinds, striping the room with light and shadow, illuminating the tangle of IV tubes and medical equipment. I woke from a fitful sleep, my head still heavy from the antidote. Mark was slumped in the chair beside my bed, his head resting on the edge of the mattress, still clutching my hand. Looking at him, no one would believe that just hours ago, this same man had been ready to bash my head in with a golf club. The slight movement of my body woke him instantly. He rubbed his eyes, his face haggard from a sleepless night, a look that perfected his husband of the year facade. He quickly poured a glass of water, tested the temperature, and held it to my lips. "Here, drink some water. Your lips are so dry. How are you feeling? Does your head still hurt?" I took a sip, deliberately avoiding his gaze, my voice still laced with the confusion of an amnesiac. "I'm better. My head just feels—" I remember going to the cellar to get wine, and then slipping. After that, it's all black. I don't remember anything else. Mark let out a sigh of relief, so audible it was almost a gasp. He stroked my hair, his voice as gentle as if he were soothing a child. "It's okay. Don't try to remember. It'll just give you a headache. The doctor said you have a mild concussion. Your memory should come back after a few days of rest. The important thing is that you're safe. That's all that matters to me," he lied without blinking. I watched him closely, studying his every micro-expression. As he set the glass down, I saw that his fingers were still trembling slightly. It wasn't the tremor of worry. It was the aftershock of adrenaline, the residual high of a gambler who had just bet everything on a single hand and hadn't been caught bluffing. A little later, Mark's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he turned to me. "It's the office, honey. A few urgent things I need to handle. I'll just step outside for a minute." I nodded obediently. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, I sat up, ignoring the sharp pain in my arm, and reached for his suit jacket hanging on the back of the chair. I need to know his next move. A man this meticulous always has a contingency plan. I quickly searched the pockets. Besides his wallet and car keys, my fingers brushed against a small, crumpled piece of paper deep inside the inner pocket. I unfolded it. It was a receipt from a hardware store, dated the previous afternoon, just hours before our anniversary dinner. My blood ran cold as I read the list of items he had purchased. 1 roll of heavy-duty duct tape, 2 large industrial-grade burlap sacks, and 3 boxes of activated charcoal, along with a bottle of high-strength sleeping pills. I felt as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over me. Activated charcoal and sleeping pills. His plan wasn't just to stage a fall. If the muscle relaxant didn't kill me, he was prepared to use the pills and charcoal to create a fake suicide scene, an asphyxiation. And the burlap sacks? He was ready to dispose of my body if necessary. His depravity was far beyond anything I could have imagined. He had left me no escape. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the hallway. Panicked, I shoved the receipt back into his pocket, tried to smooth out the jacket, and lay back down, pulling the blanket up to my chest and closing my eyes, feigning sleep. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs, so loud I was sure he could hear it. Mark pushed the door open, the strong scent of tobacco clinging to him. He stood by my bed for a long moment. I could feel his gaze on my face, scrutinizing me, trying to determine if I was truly asleep. The air in the room grew thick with tension, stretched taut like a violin string about to snap. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper in my ear, no longer warm, but cold as a voice from the grave. "Sleep well, my love. You were very lucky, but luck doesn't strike twice." I held my breath, forcing my eyelids to remain still. He hadn't given up. Near noon, the door opened again. This time, it was Chris. He was in his full, crisp uniform, his face grim, a thick file folder in his hand. Mark, who had been peeling an apple for me, quickly stood up, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach his wary eyes. "Detective Miller. Here to see Amelia?" Chris nodded, his tone all business. Mr. Davenport, I'm here to take a supplementary statement about last night's incident. While the preliminary assessment points to an accident, standard procedure requires a full report. I'll need to speak with the victim alone to avoid any undue influence on her recollection. Mark hesitated, glancing from me to Chris, his reluctance obvious. My wife is still very weak, Detective. And her memory, it's not all there. I'm not sure she can tell you much. That will be for us to determine. Chris cut him off, his voice sharp with authority. Your cooperation is appreciated. Mark didn't dare argue further. He shuffled out of the room, not forgetting to shoot me a look pregnant with meaning before he closed the door. The moment his footsteps faded, the stern mask fell from Chris's face, replaced by raw concern and anguish. He rushed to my bedside, checked the bandage on my arm, and whispered, Are you okay? Did that bastard do anything else to you? I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. I'm okay, Chris. I found the receipt in his jacket. He was planning to use charcoal and sleeping pills. He really wants me dead. Chris's jaw tightened, his hand clenching into a fist. I know. I've had my team looking into him. He pulled a stack of documents from the file and handed them to me. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. They were copies of Mark's loan statements. The numbers swam before my eyes, making me dizzy. $10 million. He was in debt to loan sharks, had lost a fortune in crypto, and had massive gambling debts online. His parents' house back in Ohio had been mortgaged to the hilt and was now facing foreclosure. He's at the end of his rope, Amelia. Chris's voice was grave. 10 million, with the interest compounding daily. He's desperate. That $5 million insurance policy is his only way out. I stared at the soulless numbers on the page, my heart aching. 5 years of my life, 5 years I had dedicated to building a home, a family, and in his eyes, my life was worth nothing more than a tool to pay off his mistakes, his vices. Our marriage vows were worth less than a bookie's ledger. Why can't you just arrest him now? I asked, my voice choked with emotion. You know what he's planning. Chris sighed, his expression pained. I wish I could, but right now, we don't have enough legally admissible evidence to charge him with attempted murder. The lemonade was spilled, the wine cellar is a mess, and your initial statement wasn't recorded. If we arrest him now, he'll likely get out on a misdemeanor, and then he'll be even more careful. You'll be in even greater danger. I understood. The law needs hard proof, physical evidence, not just suspicion. Chris took a tiny object, no bigger than a thumbnail, from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. This is a state-of-the-art micro-recorder. Keep it with you at all times. We need to catch him admitting his plan, or catch him in the act. This is a psychological war, Amelia. You have to stay strong. I clutched the small device, the cold metal, a stark reminder of my reality. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a fight for my life. I nodded, my resolve hardening. I understand. I can do this. Chris patted my shoulder, then raised his voice, slipping back into his detective persona. All right, thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Davenport. If you remember any other details, please let us know immediately. The door opened. Mark was standing right outside, his face a mask of curiosity and concern. He looked from me to Chris, trying to gauge what we had discussed, but I just closed my eyes, feigning exhaustion, continuing my role as the poor, amnesiac wife. After 3 days in the hospital, I was discharged. The sprawling lakeside mansion that had once been my dream home, where I had personally planted every rose bush and chosen every curtain, now felt cold and menacing, like a giant, ornate tomb. Every corner, every object, was a silent testament to a fabricated happiness, a witness to the dark conspiracy of the man I had shared my life with. Mark's attentiveness became suffocating. He wouldn't let me lift a finger, from pouring my own water to taking my own medication. He hired a daytime housekeeper, but sent her home early each afternoon, ensuring we were alone together in the evenings. He claimed he wanted quiet for my recovery, but I knew his true motive was complete and total control. The first night back, I lay in our familiar bed, but it felt like a bed of nails. Mark lay beside me, his steady breathing on the back of my neck, sending shivers of revulsion down my spine. I didn't dare sleep deeply, dozing in a state of high alert. The micro-recorder Chris had given me was sewn into the hem of my pajamas, the activation button always within reach. Around 2 a.m., as I feigned deep sleep, my breathing even and slow, I felt Mark stir. He sat up, his movements silent and cautious. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, I watched him through slitted eyes. He leaned over me, staring intently at my face, his eyes glinting in the dark like a nocturnal predator's, searching for any flicker of awareness. He slowly raised his hand, waving it in front of my face, then suddenly made a motion as if to choke me. My heart stopped, but I forced my body to remain limp, to show no defensive reaction. His hand stopped just inches from my throat before he slowly lowered it. He was testing me. He still suspected I might not have lost my memory. Next, he stealthily picked up my phone from the nightstand. He used my thumb, which was lying limp by my side, to unlock it with the fingerprint sensor. He scrolled through my call history, my texts, my social media messages. I held my breath. Thankfully, before leaving the hospital, Chris and I had wiped any trace of our communication, leaving only mundane well wishes from friends and family. After about 15 minutes of fruitless searching, Mark put the phone down with a quiet, relieved sigh. He lay back down, wrapping an arm around my waist from behind, and whispered, "Just keep sleeping peacefully. Soon, you'll be free from all your troubles." The whisper froze the blood in my veins. He hadn't given up. He was just waiting for the right moment, for my guard to be completely down. The next morning, I launched my psychological counteroffensive. I couldn't remain a passive victim. At breakfast, I asked with deliberate innocence, "Honey, where's that crystal vase your mom gave us for our wedding? I could have sworn I left it on the living room table yesterday, but it's gone." Mark looked at me, bewildered. "Which vase, sweetheart?" "That one broke 2 years ago, remember?" I clutched my head, my face a mask of pain and confusion. "It did? Why do I remember it so clearly from yesterday? Oh, my head is such a mess. I can't keep anything straight." I saw the corner of Mark's mouth twitch upwards. He was buying it. He believed my memory was truly scrambled. I continued the act, making small, accidental mistakes, like leaving my keys in the refrigerator or calling the housekeeper by the wrong name. Each time, his belief in my brain damage grew stronger. But he didn't know that while he was in the shower, I had slipped into his home office and planted a tiny, disguised camera under his desk. And I discovered something else. In our own bedroom, high on top of the armoire opposite our bed, a tiny infrared light blinked rhythmically. He had installed a camera to watch me, even in our most private space. This house was no longer a home. It was a prison, a stage where we were both performing the roles of a lifetime. The days that followed in the sprawling mansion unfolded like a slow-burn psychological thriller. Mark began to employ a more subtle, more insidious tactic, a form of mental torture known in psychology as gaslighting. He wanted to make me believe I was truly going insane, to make me doubt my own reality so that I would walk willingly into whatever trap he set next. It started with small things. One morning, I placed a mother-of-pearl hair clip, a precious keepsake from my late mother, on my vanity. When I returned to the room after lunch, it was gone. I searched everywhere under the bed, in the drawers, but it had vanished. That evening, Mark came home, saw me sitting dejectedly in the ransacked room, and nonchalantly pointed to the top of the armoire. "What are you looking for, honey? Your hair clip is right up there." I looked where he pointed. The clip sat neatly on the high shelf, a place I could never reach without a stool, and was certain I hadn't put it. "How did it get there?" "I left it on the vanity this morning," Mark sighed, shaking his head with an expression of profound pity and helplessness. "Amelia, darling, you're misremembering again. You put it up there yourself this morning. You said you wanted it out of the way. Your memory has gotten so bad lately. I'm really worried about you." He sounded so sincere that if I weren't the one orchestrating this counterplay, I might have believed I was losing my mind. The same scenario repeated itself over the next few days with my car keys, my wallet, even my daily vitamins. He would hide them and then place them in bizarre locations: the freezer, the trash bin, and blame it on my faulty memory. He didn't stop there. He started spreading the narrative to others. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone with my mother back in Ohio. His voice was choked with feigned emotion. "Mom, I'm so worried about Amelia. Ever since the accident, she's been so forgetful. Her moods are all over the place. One minute she's crying, the next she's laughing. The doctor thinks she's showing signs of severe post-traumatic depression. I'm afraid she might do something to herself." I stood behind the kitchen door, my knuckles white as I gripped the frame. He was preparing the ground, building a public image of me as a mentally unstable wife. So that, if one day I were to commit suicide, it would be a logical, unquestioned conclusion. I returned to my room, my heart filled with cold rage. I glanced up at the tiny infrared dot on the armoire. He was watching. He wanted to see me break. Fine. If you want a show, I'll give you a masterpiece. I began to pace the room with a lost, vacant expression. I sat in front of the mirror, talking to myself, sometimes breaking down into racking sobs, clutching my head like a woman on the brink of madness. Why can't I remember anything? Am I going crazy? I'd cry out, "Mark, help me!" Through the corner of my eye, I watched the camera. I knew that somewhere, on a phone or a computer screen, Mark was smiling, satisfied. He thought his prey was completely trapped, so thoroughly manipulated that she had lost all will to fight back. But he didn't know that every tear I shed was being meticulously documented in my own encrypted digital journal. My insanity was an act, but the verdict awaiting him was very real. The constant stress of his debt and the failed murder plot began to take its toll on Mark. He suffered from severe insomnia, often pacing the living room late into the night. I noticed a bottle of a powerful, prescription-only sedative appear in his personal medicine cabinet. He needed to stay sharp to deal with me, but his anxiety was eating him alive. As a doctor, I knew the pharmacology of these drugs inside and out, and I knew how to turn them into a weapon of my own. One morning, while Mark was showering, the sound of the running water covering any noise, I slipped into the guest bathroom where he kept his medicine. My hands moved quickly but carefully. I emptied the white sedative pills from the bottle, wrapped them in a tissue to dispose of later, and replaced them with vitamin B, 1 tablets of the exact same size and shape, which I had prepared in advance. It wouldn't harm him, but it would rob him of the artificial sleep he had come to depend on. Furthermore, every evening, as part of my devoted wife routine, I would make him a glass of warm milk. It used to be a gesture of love. Now, it was a cup of retribution. I secretly crushed a small, measured dose of furosemide, a diuretic, and dissolved it in the milk. The drug was colorless and odorless when diluted, but its effect on sleep was profoundly disruptive. Mark would drink the milk, thank me with a smile, completely unaware. He would go to bed, expecting the sedative to knock him out, but the placebo effect was no match for his frayed nerves and the physiological effects of the diuretic. That night, and for many nights after, Mark was up and down, constantly needing to use the bathroom. His sleep was fragmented, leaving him perpetually exhausted. He became irritable, with dark circles under his eyes. His usual calm, sophisticated demeanor began to crumble, replaced by a restless, short-tempered agitation. The next morning at breakfast, his phone rang. It was someone from his company. Normally, he would handle such calls with a calm, professional tone. But today, likely due to severe sleep deprivation, he exploded. "What do you mean the report isn't done? Are you all incompetent? If you can't do the job, then get the hell out." He slammed the phone down on the sofa, breathing heavily. I sat opposite him, pretending to shrink back in fear, but inside, a cold satisfaction bloomed. The mask of the successful businessman, the perfect husband, was starting to crack. "What's wrong, honey? Are you feeling okay?" I asked, my voice trembling with feigned concern. Mark turned to me, his eyes shot with red veins. He tried to control himself, but his voice was still shaky with residual anger. "It's nothing, just stress from work. Don't worry about it. I'm sorry I scared you." He rubbed his temples, a look of pain on his face. He had no idea that the crazy wife sitting before him was secretly orchestrating his biological rhythms, pushing him ever closer to the edge of a mental breakdown. A sleep-deprived, stressed-out man is prone to making mistakes, and I was patiently waiting for him to make a fatal one. The physical and mental exhaustion finally caused Mark to make a critical error. One evening, after drinking his special milk and tossing and turning on the living room sofa, he fell into a shallow sleep, leaving his phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a new message notification. I was sitting in the armchair opposite him, pretending to read. My heart skipped a beat. His phone was usually glued to his side, protected by a password and fingerprint ID. But tonight, exhausted and perhaps overconfident in my amnesia, he had let his guard down. I tiptoed over, holding my breath as I peered at the screen. The message was from an unsaved number, labeled Only Partner. The preview on the lock screen was short, but it was enough to make my blood boil. Tired, baby? Hang in there. Once this $8M deal is done, we're out of here. The baby and I miss you. Baby. $8M deal. The pieces clicked into place, forming a complete, hideous picture of betrayal. He wasn't just trying to kill me to pay off his debts. He was doing it to start a new life with another woman and their child. I forced myself to remain calm, gently placing the phone back exactly as I had found it. My mind raced, sifting through Mark's circle of acquaintances. Who was partner? I recalled his stories about work. There was one woman who always featured prominently, Jessica, his ambitious, sharp, and beautiful VP of sales. I had met her a few times at company events. She always looked at me with a mixture of admiration and envy. The next afternoon, I decided to pay a visit to Mark's office. I put on minimal makeup, accentuating my pale, tired look, and carried a lunchbox. The perfect, doting wife. As I walked into the lobby, the staff looked at me with pity. The rumors of my mental breakdown had clearly spread. I went straight to the executive floor. The door to Mark's office was slightly ajar. I peeked through the crack and saw a scene that made my stomach clench. Mark was sitting in his chair, and Jessica was standing behind him, her hands on his shoulders, gently massaging them. The gesture was far too intimate for a boss and his subordinate. "Don't worry, Mark," I heard her say, her voice sweet but laced with venom. "That bitch is almost completely gone. Just one more little push." I knocked lightly. They sprang apart instantly. Mark straightened his tie while Jessica took a few steps back, her expression shifting to one of cool professionalism. I pushed the door open, a weak smile on my face. "Honey, I brought you lunch. You've been looking so thin lately." Mark rushed to take the lunchbox, playing the part of the touched husband. "Oh, sweetheart, you shouldn't have. It's so hot outside. I could have just eaten in the cafeteria." My eyes met Jessica's. "Hello, Mrs. Davenport," she said with a polite nod. I looked directly at her, then deliberately pushed up the sleeve of my blouse, revealing the long, still red scar on my forearm, the souvenir from that night in the cellar. A faint, contemptuous smirk played on her lips. There was no pity in her eyes, only the triumphant disdain of a victor. "You're working so hard, Jessica," I said, my voice airy. "If anything ever happens to my husband, I'm sure I can count on you to take care of things." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Mark forced a laugh. Jessica nodded and walked out, but just before she left, she shot me a look of pure defiance, the look of the other woman who believes she holds all the cards, who is certain she is about to become the mistress of my entire world. The discovery of Jessica was a crucial piece of the puzzle, but I needed more concrete proof than an intimate moment in an office. I needed to know their escape plan. I asked Chris to help me rent an old, nondescript car with heavily tinted windows. That weekend, Mark told me he had an important client meeting to sort out company debts. He dressed impeccably, smelling of expensive cologne. I played the trusting wife, seeing him off at the door. But the moment his car was out of sight, I got into the rented car parked down the street and began to follow him. He didn't go to a restaurant or a golf course. He drove to a new, upscale suburban development on the outskirts of the city. He parked in front of a private, discreet obstetrics clinic. A few minutes later, Jessica emerged. She was wearing a loose-fitting maternity dress, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She looked to be at least 4 or 5 months pregnant. My heart constricted. While I had been happily planning our anniversary, my husband had been busy nurturing his mistress and their unborn child. Mark rushed out of the car to help her. He bent down, pressing his ear to her belly, his face radiant with a happiness I had craved for years but never received, as we had struggled with infertility. He guided her carefully, like she was a precious treasure. The image was more brutal than any verbal confession. He hadn't just betrayed me. He was trampling on my deepest desire to be a mother. They went to a quiet cafe nearby. I put on a baseball cap and a face mask, choosing a table in a secluded corner, hidden by a large potted plant but close enough to overhear. I turned on the recorder in my purse, leaving it slightly open and aimed in their direction. Jessica's whining voice drifted over. "Mark, how much longer? This baby is kicking like crazy. I don't want him to be born without a father, or for us to live in hiding." Mark took her hand. "Don't worry, baby. It's almost over. That woman is completely losing her mind. Just one more little accident, and it's done. The $8 million policy will pay out as soon as we have the death certificate." I had misheard the amount on the phone. The reality was even more horrifying. "Then we pay off the debt and move to Australia. I've already sorted out your visa." "You have to be careful," Jessica urged, her voice a mix of anxiety and calculation. "Don't screw it up like last time. I heard her cousin is a cop." "Don't worry about it," Mark cut her off, his voice cold and ruthless. "Everyone thinks she's a lunatic. No one will question a crazy woman's suicide. I'm doing all of this for you, for our son. You just focus on staying healthy. Leave the dirty work to me." Every word was like acid eating away at my soul. The dirty work was my life. He saw my murder as a noble sacrifice for his new family. The unborn child was innocent, but he was being nurtured with the blood and tears of another woman. I sat frozen in the corner, tears streaming down my face behind the mask. I wasn't crying out of sadness anymore. I was crying for the naive woman I used to be, and for that child, cursed with such a monstrous father. This recording would be his ticket to prison and the end of his life as he knew it. I left the cafe with a heavy heart, a stone weighing on my chest. The secret of Jessica's pregnancy transformed my pain into a smoldering fire of rage. But I knew I couldn't act rashly. Mark was getting desperate as the loan sharks closed in. That desperation would make him reckless, more prone to mistakes. I just had to be patient and wait for the right moment to deliver the final, fatal blow. 2 days later, Mark called to say he had a late client dinner and wouldn't be home until midnight. "Lock up tight, sweetheart, and don't wait up for me," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. I knew exactly where he was going, but a nagging feeling told me the real danger wasn't with Jessica. It was right here, in this house. I came home early that afternoon. The moment I opened the door, a strange, faint odor hit me. Not perfume or must, but the sharp, acrid smell of mercaptan, the chemical additive used to give natural gas its distinctive warning scent. As an anesthesiologist, my sense of smell is highly trained, especially for gases. I held my breath and cautiously moved toward the kitchen. The smell grew stronger. The kitchen window, which I always kept cracked open for ventilation, was shut tight. On closer inspection, I saw that the gaps around the window frame had been meticulously sealed with clear tape, almost invisible to a casual observer. My blood ran cold. Mark had been home. He had turned on the gas line without lighting the stove, letting the toxic fumes slowly fill the sealed room. All it would take was for me to flip a light switch or try to start the stove, and the entire kitchen would detonate. Or, more simply, the accumulating gas would asphyxiate me in my sleep, a tragic household accident, as the papers would report. My trembling hand reached out and twisted the gas valve shut. I carefully peeled the tape from the window and threw it, along with all the other windows and doors, wide open, letting the fresh air rush in. I stood by the window, taking deep breaths, feeling as though I had just narrowly avoided stepping off a cliff. He was willing to blow up our home to get rid of me. Mark came home around 11 p.m., reeking of alcohol. His eyes darted toward the kitchen, a flicker of surprise and disappointment crossing his face when he saw that everything was intact. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV. I turned and smiled at him calmly. "You're home." The kitchen smelled really gassy today, so I opened all the windows. I also called a repairman. He said the valve was loose. Good thing we caught it early. Mark froze for a second, then forced a laugh. "Really? That's lucky. The stove must be getting old. I'll buy us a new induction cooktop this weekend, just to be safe. His words were casual, but I saw the suppressed rage in his eyes. His second perfect plan had failed. He never anticipated that the sensitive nose of an anesthesiologist would be his undoing. As I watched him stumble upstairs, I thought, keep playing, Mark. Let's see how many tricks you have left. The successive failures drove Mark to a new level of desperation. He no longer had the patience for elaborate, staged accidents. He needed money, and he needed it now. The loan sharks were closing in, a fact I knew from the increasingly frantic, pleading phone calls he made when he thought I wasn't listening. 3 days after the gas leak incident, he tried again. It was a weekend, and he was being unusually attentive. He ran a hot bath for me, complete with rose petals and aromatic oils. "You've seemed so stressed lately, honey," he said. "I thought a nice, relaxing bath would help you sleep better." This sudden concern, in the current context, felt like the kiss of death. I looked at the steaming tub, the fragrant oils unable to mask the scent of danger. I smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Mark. That's so thoughtful." He kissed my forehead and left, closing the bathroom door behind him, saying he was going downstairs to watch the news. I waited until his footsteps faded, then pulled a pen-style voltage tester from the pocket of my bathrobe, a tool I had secretly purchased days earlier. A gut feeling told me this time his weapon of choice would be electricity. I cautiously dipped the tip of the tester into the water. The device immediately shrieked, its indicator light flashing a brilliant, blood red. My hand jerked back, my heart pounding. The water was live. He had tampered with the water heater's grounding wire, or, worse, deliberately exposed a live wire somewhere connected to the metal tub. The moment I stepped in, 220 volts would course through my body, causing immediate cardiac arrest. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the screaming voltage tester, more evidence. Then, I drained the tub. Wearing a pair of thick, insulating rubber slippers I had prepared, I took a quick shower and got dressed. 15 minutes later, I walked out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around my hair, my face flushed and looking refreshed. Mark was in the living room, holding the TV remote, but his eyes were glued to the staircase, waiting for a scream, a thud, any sound of tragedy. When he saw me walking down the stairs, perfectly fine, his face went white as a sheet. The remote nearly slipped from his grasp. You're done already?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "Yep," I replied casually, toweling my hair. "But you know, honey, I think there's something wrong with the water heater." I was about to get in the tub, but the water felt tingly. It freaked me out, so I just drained it and took a shower instead. "We should probably call an electrician tomorrow. That could be really dangerous." Mark stared at me, his mouth agape, utterly speechless. He couldn't believe my luck or my intuition. Disappointment and fear warred in his eyes. He forced a twisted, pathetic smile. "Oh, yeah. I'll check it out tomorrow. Must be some old wiring." I watched his defeated posture, a cold smile playing on my own lips. He was backing himself into a corner. With every failure, he was sinking deeper into the mire of his own making. The deadline from the loan sharks arrived. I knew this because Chris had been secretly forwarding me the threatening text messages Mark was receiving. They were done waiting. They promised to take a hand if he didn't have the money in 3 days. Cornered, Mark abandoned subtlety and went for a more direct approach, selling my assets. His target was a high-end condo in downtown Seattle, my own property from before our marriage. It was currently rented out to an expat and was worth at least $1 million. He started spinning a tale about a massive, time-sensitive business deal. He needed a huge injection of capital to import a shipment of goods with a guaranteed high return. He suggested I sell the condo to fund the venture, promising to buy me a bigger, better place once the deal went through. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Amelia," he pleaded, his eyes shining with false sincerity. "Trust me, we sell the condo, flip this deal in a few months, and we'll double our money. I'll make it up to you tenfold." I looked at him with an expression of naive trust. "Of course I trust you, honey, but The deed to that condo. My mom is holding it for me back in Ohio. She put it in her safe deposit box for safekeeping, and she just left on a cruise with her senior group. She won't be back for another week. Mark's face fell. Do you know the combination to the safe? He pressed. Can't we just go get it? I don't. She changes it all the time. And she took the key to the house with her. I lied smoothly. Mark's jaw clenched. He couldn't wait a week. I knew he was already planning to forge a power of attorney to sell the property behind my back. But he was one step too late. The moment I confirmed his murder plot, I had contacted a lawyer friend of Chris's. We had quietly and legally transferred the title of the condo to my mother's name via a conditional deed of gift. Simultaneously, I had filed legal motions with our bank and the court to freeze all our joint assets, citing suspected fraudulent activity by my spouse. Legally, the condo was no longer mine to sell, let alone his. Mark knew none of this. He still saw me as his naive, brain-damaged pawn. When he received the notification from the bank that their joint account was frozen pending an investigation that I had initiated, he went ballistic. He screamed at the bank's customer service, then proceeded to smash everything in his home office. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood echoed through the house. I sat in the living room, calmly sipping my tea, listening to his impotent rage as if it were a symphony of sweet revenge. His financial lifelines were being cut, one by one. The walls were closing in. Amidst the suffocating tension of those days, an unexpected ray of light pierced through the gloom of my life. I attended an international medical conference held at a large hotel downtown. Despite the turmoil at home, I was determined to maintain my professional life, to keep myself grounded and sane. During a coffee break, as I stood alone, staring absently out a window, a warm, familiar voice spoke beside me. Amelia? Is that really you? I turned, and my jaw dropped. Standing before me was David, my old college classmate. He had been the class president, the model student, and, as I later found out, had harbored a secret crush on me for 4 years. David had changed. He was more mature, more confident in his tailored suit, but his kind smile and the warmth in his eyes were exactly as I remembered. David, oh my God, it's been so long, I exclaimed, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. You look great. So do you, he replied, his gaze sharp and observant. Still as beautiful as ever, though you look tired. As a forensic pathologist for the county, a detail he shared moments later, his eyes were trained to see beyond the surface, and they seemed to pierce through my carefully constructed facade to the exhaustion and pain beneath. We sat down and talked. David told me about his work at the medical examiner's office, dealing with complex criminal cases. A job that brought him into contact with the dead more than the living had given him a calm, profound depth. When I vaguely mentioned that I was going through some family troubles and had a morbid curiosity about new, untraceable poisons, he didn't pry. He just listened with quiet empathy. Amelia, I don't know what you're going through, he said, his voice full of sincere concern. But if you ever need any professional help, or just a friend to talk to, I'm here. He wasn't just offering empty words. Right then and there, he shared valuable insights into new toxins being used in criminal circles, how to detect them, and how to protect oneself. Information that, little did he know, could very well save my life. David's presence was like a cool breeze on a scorching day. His genuine, unselfish concern was a stark contrast to the calculated deceit of the man I once trusted with my life. My heart was still a bleeding wound, not yet ready to open up to anyone. But David's quiet support was a small, steady anchor, reminding me that good men still existed, that there were still things in this world worth fighting for. As I left, his business card warm in my hand, I felt a little lighter, a little more hopeful. In the days that followed, I started noticing the strange looks from my neighbors. They would whisper behind their hands when I took out the trash, their conversations ceasing abruptly when I looked their way. The situation came to a head when my mother called from Ohio, her voice trembling with panic. Amelia, what is going on? Mark just called me, sobbing. He said you're having an affair, that you've been physically abusive towards him, and that you're showing signs of insanity. He said you're trying to sell the condo to run off with your lover and he's at his wit's end trying to stop you. Is any of this true? The blood rushed to my head. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. He wasn't just trying to kill me physically, he was trying to assassinate my character, to destroy my reputation. He wanted to paint me as a promiscuous, violent, mentally ill woman, so that if I did die suddenly, people would just shake their heads and say it was the tragic but predictable end for a woman who had lost her way. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing my voice to remain calm to reassure my mother. Mom, listen to me very carefully. Mark is drowning in debt. He's making up these stories to pressure me into selling the condo to pay off his loan sharks. I am perfectly fine. I'm still working. I'm healthy. Don't believe a word he says. But please, for now, pretend that you do. We can't let him know we're on to him. I can handle this. It took a long time to calm her down. He was willing to use my own elderly mother as a pawn in his sick game, but he had miscalculated. He thought shaming me would make me break. He didn't realize his actions were a double-edged sword that would ultimately be his own undoing. I continued my performance as the submissive, confused wife. But behind the scenes, I was gathering my arsenal. The hidden camera in his office proved invaluable. It recorded Mark, after playing the role of the long-suffering husband to the neighbors, storming into his office, slamming the door, and revealing his true self. He screamed obscenities at his creditors over the phone, his language crude and violent. He smashed a vase, kicked over a chair, his face contorted with rage and fear. I told you to give me a few more days. My wife is about to sell the house. You push me too far, and I'll kill your whole damn family, his voice snarled on the recording. Mark's deadline was up. The threats from the loan sharks were no longer just words. They started throwing paint bombs and bags of rotting fish at the gates of his company headquarters. The cornered animal was preparing for its final, desperate attack. As I expected, on a dreary Thursday evening, Mark came home with a bouquet of white lilies, a flower I actively disliked for its cloying, funeral parlor scent, a detail he had never bothered to remember. He placed the flowers on the table, his face a forced mask of cheerfulness that couldn't hide the haggard anxiety in his eyes. He sat down next to me, taking my hand. His voice was soft, almost tender, which made my skin crawl. Honey, I know things have been tense between us. I've been a terrible husband. I was thinking, why don't we get away for the weekend? Just the two of us. He continued, I've booked a private cabin up in the Catskills. It's quiet, secluded, surrounded by nature. It will be good for you to rest, and for us to reconnect. The Catskills, private cabin, secluded. The words were red flags, blaring sirens in my head. I knew exactly what reconnecting meant to him. It was a death trap, wrapped in a pretty package. In that isolated place, no one would hear me scream. A tragic hiking accident, a slip and fall from a cliff, it would be all too plausible. I looked deep into his eyes and saw the cold, calculated intent behind his clumsy facade. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was clear. This was the opportunity Chris and I had been waiting for. If I refused, he would find another way. Perhaps right here in this house, where I would be at a disadvantage. If I agreed, I could lure him into a trap of my own making. I smiled, a weak, compliant smile. Oh, that sounds wonderful. I have been feeling so cooped up. If you can get away from work, I'd love to go. Mark's eyes lit up. A flicker of hope quickly extinguished and replaced by a cold, deadly resolve. Great, I've already cleared my schedule. We'll leave first thing tomorrow morning. The moment he went to shower, I slipped out onto the balcony and sent a coded text to Chris. The fish has taken the bait. Location, Pine Ridge Cabins, Catskills. Timing, tomorrow night. Chris replied instantly. That's too dangerous, Amelia. Are you sure? My response was firm. I'm sure. It's the only way to catch him in the act. Have your team ready. That night, I packed a small weekend bag. I chose my prettiest dresses, as if I were genuinely excited. But hidden beneath the clothes were the tools of my survival. A small first aid kit with a sterile scalpel hidden beneath the bandages. a tube of deep red lipstick that was actually another micro recorder, and most importantly, a tiny GPS tracker, the size of a button that Chris had given me. I carefully slit the seam of the waterproof windbreaker I planned to wear, tucked the tracker inside, and meticulously sewed it shut. Every stitch was a prayer, a declaration of my will to live. I wasn't going on vacation. I was walking into the lion's den to hunt the lion. The car wound its way up the serpentine mountain road. A thick fog blanketed everything, reducing visibility to just a few feet. Mark drove with intense focus, his eyes occasionally flicking to me in the rearview mirror, probing, assessing. I sat silently, gazing out at the sheer rock faces and the deep, unforgiving ravines below, wondering if this was where he planned for it all to end. The Pine Ridge cabin was perched on a remote outcrop, completely isolated from the main tourist town. It was surrounded by a dense, silent forest of pine trees. The wind whistling through the branches sounded like mournful sighs. As I'd anticipated, cell service was spotty at best, the perfect location for a murder with no witnesses. Mark laid the romance on thick. He helped me into the cabin, gushed about the view, and insisted on preparing dinner himself. It was a candlelit affair, with steak, truffle mushrooms, and of course, wine. "Just a little, to warm you up," he said, pouring the red liquid and pushing a glass toward me. I raised the glass, the aroma filling my senses. But the lesson from the wine cellar was seared into my memory. I would never again consume anything he gave me. When he turned to adjust a flickering candle, I quickly and silently poured most of the wine into the thick cloth napkin on my lap, leaving just enough to wet the rim. I took a fake sip, letting the liquid touch my lips, and set the glass down. "This is delicious, honey," I said, my cheeks slightly flushed for effect. "It's been so long since we've had a moment like this." Mark glanced at the nearly empty glass and smiled, satisfied. He began to reminisce, talking about the early days of our marriage, about love and sacrifice, his voice filled with a maudlin, self-pitying tone. I knew he was either trying to appeal to my sympathies or steeling his own dark conscience for the act to come. "Amelia," he said, taking my hand, his eyes welling with crocodile tears. "I know I've been a terrible husband lately. I promise, after this trip, I'm going to change. I'll make everything up to you." I looked at him, my heart a block of ice. His acting had improved, but unfortunately for him, his only audience had long since seen through to the monster beneath. I decided it was time to force his hand. "Mark," I said, my voice soft but every word sharp and clear, "I was feeling so down the other day, with my health and all. So I went to see my lawyer. I had my will drawn up." Mark's hand, holding mine, went rigid. He stared at me, his eyes wide. A will? Why would you do that?" I continued nonchalantly. "Oh, just in case. I've decided to leave my entire estate, my savings, the insurance policies, everything to my mother. After all, we don't have any children, and you're a successful man. You can take care of yourself." Crash! The wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Red wine splattered across the white rug like a fresh blood stain. His face was ashen, his lips trembling. Are you kidding me? Why would you leave it all to your mother?" I feigned surprise at his extreme reaction. "Why are you so upset? It's my money. I've already signed all the papers. My lawyer has them. They become legally binding on Monday, should anything happen to me." Mark stared down at the floor, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. If my will was already finalized, my death would be financially meaningless to him, unless he acted tonight. Before Monday, before anyone knew, his panicked, twisted logic was clear. I watched his trembling shoulders and knew I had just lit the fuse on a time bomb. Tonight, he had no choice but to act. The rest of the dinner passed in a tense, suffocating silence. Mark claimed to have a headache and went out onto the balcony to chain smoke. The sky opened up, and a torrential downpour began. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and lightning tore through the black, inky night. The weather itself seemed to be conspiring with him, setting the perfect stage for the tragedy to come. I sat in the bedroom, my hand resting on the hem of my windbreaker, feeling for the tiny bump of the GPS tracker. The small indicator light was still blinking. It was working, but a seed of doubt sprouted in my mind. With this storm, there could be mudslides. Would Chris and his team make it in time? I checked the scalpel hidden up my sleeve, taking deep breaths to control my racing heart. Around 11 p.m., Mark came back into the room. He had changed out of his dinner clothes and into a sleek, black rain suit. On his hands, he wore a pair of black leather gloves. He looked at me, his eyes devoid of any warmth, any history. They were the cold, detached eyes of an executioner. "Amelia, come out on the balcony with me. The rain has stopped. The air is so fresh." His voice was a dry croak. I glanced out the window. The rain was still coming down in sheets. His lie was so blatant, so clumsy, it was clear he was done playing games. He had lost all patience, all reason. The mask was off. "Okay, I'll be right out," I replied, pulling on my windbreaker and discreetly activating the recorder in my lipstick tube. I stepped out onto the balcony. A blast of cold, wet wind hit me, making me shiver. The balcony overlooked a sheer, dark drop into the ravine below, protected only by a waist-high tempered glass railing. The stone tiles were slick with rain. Mark stood with his back to the railing, his silhouette dark and menacing against the dim light from the bedroom. He beckoned to me. "Come over here. Look at the view." I walked slowly, deliberately, keeping a safe distance. When I was about 6 feet away, I stopped. Mark looked at me, the smile gone from his face. He started walking toward me, his arms spread as if for an embrace. But his posture was that of a predator closing in. "You know, Amelia," he said, his voice partially lost in the wind and rain, "I really wanted this to end peacefully, but you forced my hand. You're too smart for your own good. And cutting off my money, that was cruel." "What are you talking about, Mark?" I asked, my hand secretly closing around the handle of the scalpel in my sleeve. "Don't play dumb anymore," he roared, lunging at me. "You know everything, don't you? You froze the accounts. You wrote a new will. You're trying to ruin me." "Well, if I'm going down, you're coming with me." He charged like a wild animal. I stumbled backward on the slippery tiles, his gloved hands reaching for my throat. In that terrifying moment, I knew I was alone, facing the man who had become a monster in the heart of a raging storm. The wind howled in my ears like the screams of 1,000 lost souls echoing from the ravine below. As Mark lunged, time seemed to slow to a crawl. I could see every contorted muscle in his face, the madness in his bloodshot eyes. He was putting all his weight, all his desperation, into one final push, one that would send me over the edge and into the black abyss. But I was not a lamb to the slaughter. The self-defense classes Chris had forced me to take, the nights I spent studying human reflexes under pressure, it all came flooding back in that split second. Just as his hands were about to slam into my chest, I dropped my center of gravity, planting my left foot firmly on the slick stone. My right leg pivoted, and I twisted my body to the side, using his own momentum against him. Whoosh! He missed completely. The force of his charge, combined with the slippery surface, made it impossible for him to stop. His large frame crashed violently into the glass railing behind me. Crack! The sound was sharp and sickening, loud enough to be heard over the thunder. The tempered glass shuddered, and a spiderweb of cracks instantly spread across its surface, emitting a series of terrifying groans. Mark teetered on the edge, his hands scrabbling for a grip on the top of the fractured railing, his face pale with terror as he stared down into the endless darkness. A few more inches, and he would have been the one to go over. I scrambled backward, putting more distance between us, my hand still gripping the hidden scalpel. Mark turned to face me, the fear in his eyes quickly replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. He realized his prey was not as helpless as he thought. With a guttural roar, he plunged his hand into his pocket and pulled out a small, sharp paring knife, its blade glinting menacingly in the dim light. "You bitch! You think you can trick me? I'll kill you!" He advanced on me, step by step, the knife pointed straight at my heart. I didn't run. There was nowhere to go. The door was behind him, and I could never outrun him. Instead, I calmly pulled my own secret weapon from my sleeve. A syringe filled with a clear liquid. I held it up, my thumb on the plunger. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice ringing out with newfound authority. "You take one more step, and I'll stick this in you." "Do you have any idea what this is?" Mark froze, his eyes fixated on the syringe. As the husband of an anesthesiologist, he was all too aware of the potent drugs I worked with every day. Quote, "What are you doing?" he stammered. A cold smile touched my lips. "This is a new neurotoxin I've been working on. One little prick is all it takes. It's in your bloodstream in 3 seconds. It won't kill you right away, Mark. It'll just paralyze you, slowly, starting with your fingers, then your legs, then your lungs. You'll be wide awake, unable to move, unable to breathe." My words, delivered with clinical precision and a chillingly calm demeanor, struck at his deepest fear. He swallowed hard, the hand holding the knife beginning to tremble. He looked from me to the syringe, hesitation warring with rage in his eyes. He was afraid to die. All greedy men are. "Amelia, calm down," he said, taking a step back, his tone shifting to one of negotiation. Let's talk about this. I'll put the knife down, you put the syringe down, okay?" I didn't lower my hand. My eyes were locked on his. "It's too late for that, Mark. The moment you pushed me, there was no turning back." The rain continued to lash down, soaking us both. It mingled with the cold sweat on my face, but I didn't dare wipe it away. I kept him cornered, the syringe, my only shield, forcing him back against the far wall of the balcony. The tables had turned. The hunter was now the prey, cowering before the venom of the victim he had so grievously underestimated. I knew I couldn't hold this bluff for long. The syringe contained nothing but harmless saline solution. It was a high-stakes psychological gamble, and I was betting my life on it. I needed his confession. I needed his own words, recorded on the device in my pocket, to be his damnation. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking but each word clear. "Why would you do this to me? 5 years, Mark. What did I ever do wrong? I gave you everything, and you planned to murder me for a life insurance policy." Pressed against the wall, facing what he believed to be certain death, Mark's final mask of civility crumbled to dust. He looked at me and let out a wild, cackling laugh that was swallowed by a clap of thunder. "Why? You're asking me why? Because I needed the money. Do you have any idea what it's like to have sharks breathing down your neck every single day? I'm $10 million in the hole. What was your pathetic little doctor's salary going to do about that? And Jessica?" I pressed, my hand steady. "Were she and that baby in her belly worth more than the life of your wife?" Mark flinched, then his eyes turned venomous. "Yes!" he screamed. "Jessica makes me feel like a man. She's giving me a son, something your barren womb never could. I love money, and I need money to take care of them, to start over somewhere else. You were just a goddamn obstacle. If you had just died quietly the first time, I wouldn't be in this mess." His confession, raw and brutal, was a blade twisting in my heart, severing the last, frayed thread of affection I might have held for him. In his world, I was nothing but a means to an end, a sacrifice for his greed and selfishness. There was no love, no remorse, only cold, hard calculation. "So you love money more than my life?" I asked one last time. For the benefit of the recorder? "Yes, I love money more than anything," he shrieked, his face a gargoyle of madness. "Without money, life isn't worth living. Your death gives me money, and it gives me freedom." I took a deep breath, a strange sense of peace settling over me. The pain, the hope, the anguish, it all washed away with the rain, leaving only an empty calm and a steely resolve. I had what I needed. Our marriage, our love, had officially died right here, on this storm-swept balcony. "All right, Mark," I said, my voice eerily steady. "Thank you for telling me the truth. Now you can go to hell with your imaginary money." My calm response seemed to trigger something in him. He stared at me, then at the syringe. Perhaps my lack of immediate action, my strange placidity, aroused his suspicion. He was a cunning man, and in a life-or-death situation, that cunning was razor-sharp. You "You're bluffing," he hissed, his eyes narrowing. "If that was real poison, you would have used it by now. You don't have the guts to kill anyone. You're just a coward." I didn't answer. I just took another step back, tightening my grip on the syringe. My silence was all the confirmation he needed. With a roar of pure, primal fury, Mark realized he'd been tricked. The fear vanished, replaced by a murderous rage more intense than before. "You lying bitch. I'll kill you." He lunged, the knife held high, moving with terrifying speed. This time there was no hesitation, no testing the waters. He was going for the kill. The distance was too short, the floor too slippery. I knew I couldn't dodge this. I closed my eyes, raising my arm in a futile attempt to block the blow, bracing for the cold steel to tear through my flesh. Thud. A strange sound. Not the sound of a knife finding its mark. I felt no pain. I snapped my eyes open to a horrifying sight. A tall figure had burst from the doorway and thrown himself in front of me, taking the full force of the attack. It was David. He was wearing a black raincoat, but one shoulder was now ripped open, blood gushing from the wound, mixing with the rain to stain his jacket, a deep, dark red. He had used his own body as a shield. Mark's knife was embedded deep in his shoulder. "David!" I screamed, rushing to catch him as he staggered and fell. Mark stared in disbelief, letting go of the knife still stuck in David's shoulder. He stumbled backward, his face a mask of pure shock. He never expected a third person to be here. While he was still reeling, the entire scene was suddenly flooded with light. From the forest below and from the front of the cabin, dozens of high-powered spotlights switched on, pinning us in their beams. "This is the Seattle Police Department. Mark Davenport, you are surrounded. Drop your weapon and put your hands in the air." The voice from a megaphone boomed through the night, powerful and absolute. Red laser dots from sniper rifles danced on Mark's chest and forehead. He looked around, blinded and terrified, and finally, completely, broke. The trap he had set for me had become his own cage. Mark collapsed onto the wet balcony floor, clutching his head, his body racked with violent tremors. The monster was gone, replaced by a pathetic, defeated shell of a man. Chris led the SWAT team as they swarmed the balcony. 2 officers pinned Mark and cuffed his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs was the sound of a life sentence being passed. I knelt beside David, pressing my hands firmly against his bleeding shoulder. He winced in pain but managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, just a flesh wound, as long as you're safe." Looking from David's pained but caring face to Mark's defeated form being led away, a storm of emotions washed over me. One man, my husband, had tried to kill me for money. Another, a friend, had nearly died to save me. The irony was as bitter as bile. Chris came over, checked David's wound, and patted my shoulder. "The ambulance is at the bottom of the road. Get him down there now." Then he turned to Mark, his voice dripping with contempt. He leaned in close, but spoke loud enough for me to hear. "You really thought you had it all figured out, didn't you, Davenport? Kill your wife, fly off to Australia with your mistress? Too bad Jessica couldn't wait." Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wide with confusion. What are you talking about?" Chris smirked. "My team picked her up at SeaTac Airport at 6 p.m. tonight. She was checking in for a flight to Sydney. Her luggage was full of forged documents and evidence of your asset transfers. She sang like a canary, Mark. Said you were the mastermind. Said you forced her into it." Mark let out a howl of pure agony, a wounded animal's cry. He thrashed wildly, trying to get at Chris, but the officers held him fast. His last hope, the woman and child for whom he had destroyed everything, had betrayed him without a second thought to save herself. I stood up and walked over to him. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and despair. I looked down at him, no longer afraid, no longer hurt, only filled with a profound sense of pity. "You lost, Mark," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper against the now fading rain. "You didn't lose to me or to the police. You lost to your own greed and your own cruelty. The money, the woman, the child, everything you wanted is gone. All you have left are these handcuffs." The police led him away, his back slumped in defeat. I turned and helped David to his feet. The storm was over. The sky was beginning to clear. And though the wound in David's shoulder was still bleeding, and the wound in my heart was still raw, I knew, for the first time in a long time, that the dawn was coming. After Mark's arrest, the story of the doctor's death plot exploded across social media. News outlets ran sensational headlines, and online forums buzzed with speculation. While many people expressed sympathy, a vocal minority whispered that, where there's smoke, there's fire, suggesting I must have done something to provoke such a monstrous reaction from my husband. My life, already shattered, was now on public display. But the most exhausting trial was yet to come. The very next day, Mark's mother and younger brother drove up from Ohio and descended upon my hospital. They weren't there to apologize. They were there to make a scene. Mark's mother, a woman whose hard life had chiseled her features into a mask of perpetual grievance, threw herself onto the floor of the hospital lobby and began to wail. "Injustice! My boy is innocent. He's the kindest, gentlest soul. This she-devil framed him. She wanted to send him to prison so she could steal all his money. Give me back my son!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. Mark's brother, a shiftless young man with a chip on his shoulder, stood beside her, live streaming the entire spectacle on his phone, calling on the court of public opinion to demand justice for his brother. A crowd of onlookers gathered, their whispers and stares like 1,000 tiny needles. I stood there in my crisp white coat, feeling utterly defiled. I wanted to run, to hide, to collapse, but I knew that if I backed down now, I would lose everything. My honor and the truth of Mark's crimes would be buried under an avalanche of lies. I took a deep breath, lifted my chin, and walked directly toward them. I didn't try to help his mother up or engage in a shouting match. I looked straight into the camera lens of the phone and spoke, my voice calm but ringing with authority. "For those of you watching, my name is Dr. Amelia Stanton. I am the victim in this case. My husband, Mark Davenport, was arrested while actively trying to murder me for an $8 million insurance policy to pay off his mob debts. He was having an affair, has a child with his mistress, and meticulously planned my murder for months. All the evidence, audio recordings, video footage, and his own confession is in the hands of the Seattle Police Department." I paused, my gaze locking with Mark's mother's, causing her sobs to falter. "You say your son is gentle? Was he gentle when he tried to electrocute me in my own bathtub? Was he gentle when he filled my kitchen with gas? You say I want his money? Ma'am, I have spent years paying off his debts with my own hard-earned money. I am not here to argue. I am here to state a fact. Evil cannot triumph over truth. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have security escort you out, and I will sue you for slander." My unwavering resolve and the cold, hard facts I presented silenced the crowd. The whispers died down, and the looks of suspicion turned to respect. Defeated, Mark's mother scrambled to her feet and allowed her son to lead her away in shame. My legs were shaking, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years. In custody, Mark's cunning returned. He hired a high-powered defense attorney, a man notorious for getting guilty clients off on technicalities. Their strategy was clear, an insanity defense. The lawyer submitted a thick file to the DA's office, claiming Mark had a history of paranoid schizophrenia, brought on by work-related stress, that caused him to suffer from delusions and violent outbursts. The attempted murder, they argued, was not premeditated but the tragic result of a psychotic break. During interrogations, Mark played the part of a madman, muttering incoherently, laughing and crying at random, sometimes failing to recognize his own family. It was a convincing performance, and it was bogging down the investigation. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation. As the victim and a medical professional, I was asked to be present as an expert witness. On the day of the evaluation, I walked into a room where Mark was huddled in a corner, his eyes vacant, mumbling nonsense. To the untrained eye, he looked genuinely ill. But I wasn't an untrained eye. I knew all about involuntary autonomic nervous responses. I requested permission to directly assess his pupillary reflexes. I walked over to the table where he was sitting and, without warning, slammed my hand down hard beside him. Bang! Mark jumped, his pupils instantly constricting, and the heart monitor he was hooked up to spiked dramatically. It was the physiological response of a perfectly sane person experiencing fear, not someone in a catatonic state. You're a very good actor, Mark, I said, my voice cold as ice. But physiology doesn't lie. Your pupils, your heart rate, they betray you. You're not insane. You're just a coward. Before his lawyer could object, David walked into the room, holding a file. He placed it on the table. This might be of interest, he said to the panel. We've investigated this psychiatric file. It's a forgery, purchased 2 months ago for $50,000 from a discredited doctor running a clinic out of his basement. We've already spoken to the doctor. He's confessed everything. The color drained from Mark's face. His lawyer went pale. Their elaborate charade had been exposed. There was nowhere left for him to run. The trial of Mark Davenport and Jessica Miller took place on a bleak, drizzly day that perfectly matched the mood in the courtroom. It was packed. I sat in the front row, next to David and Chris, dressed simply, my expression calm and resolute. I was there to witness justice, not to beg for sympathy. Mark and Jessica stood in the dock, looking gaunt and haggard. The swagger of the corporate executive and the glamour of the ambitious VP were gone, replaced by the shabby fear of common criminals. When the questioning began, a pathetic drama unfolded. The two former lovers, who had once planned a life together, turned on each other like rabid dogs. "He forced me," Jessica wailed, pointing at Mark. "He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him." "Liar," Mark screamed back. "It was your idea. You and your baby, needing money for your precious new life in Australia. You pushed me to do it." The courtroom erupted in murmurs of disgust. Then, the prosecutor played the key piece of evidence, the recording from the balcony in the Catskills. Mark's cold, cruel voice filled the silent room. "I love money more than anything. Your death gives me money, and it gives me freedom." A collective chill went through the gallery. Mark hung his head, trembling, knowing it was over. After 2 days, the verdict came in. Mark Davenport was sentenced to 20 years in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Jessica Miller received a 7-year sentence for her role as an accomplice. The judge's gavel came down with a final, decisive crack. Justice had been served. Mark's conviction sent shockwaves that destroyed his family. The loan sharks, unable to get their money from him, went after his mother and brother. They terrorized the family, vandalizing their small home in Ohio. The stress caused Mark's mother to have a massive stroke. She was left bedridden, paralyzed, and unable to speak. His brother, the aspiring social media warrior, was charged with harassment and public mischief for his live-streamed stunt at the hospital and was sentenced to community service and probation. With no one to care for her and no money for medical bills, Mark's mother withered away in a lonely, squalid existence. I heard the news from a distant relative. I felt no joy, only a profound sadness for the web of suffering his greed had woven. I sold the lakeside mansion, a place now tainted with too many dark memories. With a portion of the money, I anonymously arranged for a home care nurse for Mark's mother. "Why would you do that, after everything they did to you?" David asked me. "I'm not doing it for them," I replied, looking out at the city skyline. "I'm doing it for me. I refuse to carry hatred in my heart. Let this be the final payment on a debt of karma. I need to be free." With the remaining money, I bought a small, cozy condo with a balcony full of succulents, resilient, tough plants that thrived in adversity, just like me. I was starting over. I took an extended leave of absence from the hospital. Dr. Evans understood completely. "A ship needs time in a safe harbor to repair after a storm," he said, signing my leave request without question. I packed a bag and left. Not for a luxury vacation, but for a medical mission trip to a remote, impoverished area in Appalachia. David wanted to come, but I gently refused. "I need time to heal myself, David," I told him. "I can't start something new when my heart is still broken. Let me go alone. When I'm ready, I'll find you." He understood. He just drove me to the bus station, pressed a bottle of vitamins into my hand, and watched until the bus pulled away. In the mountains of West Virginia, surrounded by staggering poverty and the simple dignity of the people, I found my peace. I treated malnourished children and elderly people suffering from chronic illnesses with no access to care. Seeing their gratitude for the smallest kindness put my own suffering into perspective. My personal tragedy, as devastating as it was, seemed small in the face of their daily struggles. The work consumed me, leaving no room for grief. At night, in a simple cabin, the sound of crickets, my only companion, the nightmares of Mark, finally ceased. His memory began to fade, replaced by the smiles of the children I had helped, the grateful hand of an old woman whose pain I had eased. I rediscovered my purpose. My white coat wasn't just a uniform, it was a calling. Time passed. The scar on my arm faded to a thin, silver line. The wound in my heart began to heal. A year after the trial, I received a letter from prison. It was from Mark. He was being transferred to a maximum security facility out of state and wanted to see me one last time. I hesitated, then decided to go. I needed to close this chapter of my life for good. The man who sat opposite me behind the plexiglass was a stranger. He looked 20 years older, his hair graying, his eyes sunken and lifeless. The confident, charming man I had married was gone, replaced by a broken, hollowed-out inmate. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I wanted to apologize. I know now what I did. I lost everything. My mother is paralyzed. My brother is on probation. And Jessica, she threw me under the bus. And you were the only one who showed my mother any kindness. He wept, telling me of his remorse, his sleepless nights. He even pathetically asked if, after he served his time, I might give him a chance to start over. I listened, unmoved. His regret was not born of empathy, but of loss. It was the regret of a man who had gambled everything and lost. When he was finished, I spoke calmly. "Mark, the woman who loved you, who would have done anything for you, she died in the wine cellar that night. I'm not here as your wife. I'm here to say goodbye to a ghost. I hope you find a way to pay your debt to society. As for the debt you owe me, it's canceled. We are even. From this day forward, you and I are strangers." I put down the phone and walked away without looking back. I returned to my job, a new woman. I was promoted to head of anesthesiology, not just for my skills, but for my resilience and leadership. I was no longer the timid, accommodating doctor, but a confident, decisive woman who had earned her colleagues' respect. My life was no longer defined by a man, but by my own achievements and my own happiness. And David, he was always there, patient, quiet, and steadfast. His affection wasn't in grand gestures, but in small, thoughtful acts. A hot coffee waiting for me after a long night on call, a book he thought I'd enjoy, a simple goodnight text. One day, he came to my condo. Instead of roses, he brought me a small, prickly cactus with a single, brilliant yellow flower blooming on top. "This is for you," he said with his gentle smile. "It's tough, it can survive anywhere, and it still manages to create something beautiful." It reminded me of you. I took the small pot, my heart stirring with a warm, gentle emotion I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the blind, passionate infatuation I'd had for Mark, but something calmer, deeper, and more real. "Thank you, David," I said, my smile, for the first time in a long time, reaching my eyes. I think I'm ready to take care of this now." 3 years later, I sat on my balcony, sipping chamomile tea and watching the city lights twinkle to life. David sat beside me, engrossed in a medical journal. We hadn't had a big wedding, just a simple ceremony at the courthouse and a quiet dinner with our closest friends and family. I had learned that happiness wasn't in the grand, public displays, but in the quiet, private moments of peace and trust. Our life was simple and good. We worked hard, we cooked together, we talked. There were no secrets, no lies, only a deep and abiding companionship. The past was still there, a faded scar, but it no longer hurt. It was just a reminder of the strength I never knew I had. "Honey?" I said softly. David looked up from his book. "Yes, love?" "Nothing," I smiled. "The tea is just really good tonight." He put his book down and took my hand, his touch warm and steady. "Is it the tea?" he asked. "Or the company?" I laughed and leaned my head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, the scent of safety, of home. Outside, the world rushed on with its schemes and its heartbreaks. But in here, with him, the storm was finally over. I had walked through hell, but I had made it back. And I had learned that sometimes, heaven is nothing more than a quiet moment, with a cup of tea, beside the one you love.